I want to do a talk on basically peak oil and how it ties to the collapse of growth, and also talk a little bit about the exponential function. So ultimately, this end of growth, which was predicted back then they were supercomputers. Our cell phones are more powerful than the supercomputers they had. And the reason why a supercomputer, which is a really simple computer now, comparison, was able to make this calculation, is it deals with something called the exponential function. And the exponential function basically is anytime you say we want a 3% growth, or a city has a 3% growth per year, or we want to grow a market at 1% per year or whatever, that's an exponential function, because in a way it's I don't know what's, remember on if I was to say I was going to charge you interest on top of interest, right? Can't remember what that's called. That's an exponential function of accumulation of interest, right? Because it keeps adding to it and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So the bottom line is, in a finite world, you can't have infinite growth. Even with technology, even with the best innovations out there, you can't have constant growth. Population is projected to be, by 2040 to be something like 20 billion. 2040. Is that right? 20 billion? Yeah, 2040. That's just 20 years away, right? 30 years away. So ultimately, what's happening is that population growth isn't going up exponentially. No, it's not, right? In places like India and in China, it's going up, but it isn't exponentially. But however, the consumption of crude oil is going up exponentially, because you got to think about crude or oil. We live in this, in this period of time called the age of crude, right? Oil. And ultimately, if agriculture is based on on oil, running from fertilizers, farm machine, all of that is based on crude, right? And exports and imports based on crude. So all of our, getting cheap goods from China and everything else, as the cost of oil goes up, the cost of these goods are going to go up. And obviously cars and transportation. Our power system now, especially Japan, was nuclear, but we've just gone back to crude now, coal. We've just fired up all our coal burning stations, and we're back to buying coal from China and burning a dirty fuel, right? A fossil fuel. And ultimately, everything we live in this, in this crude society, crude oil society, right? The crude society. What I call, you could also refer to as the grid, right? The grid. Everything we have is tied to this, this delivery and use. So ultimately, this collapse of growth is going to fit into and tie in with the end of the peak oil, the end of oil, right? And we're in end of oil, and there are more oil reserves, yada yada yada. All the major oil reserves have been discovered. There isn't any, we've been looking for the last 100 years for oil, and recently the Gulf the catastrophe that happened with BP they were drilling a really, really deep oil reserve. And when you're drilling that deep, there's challenges and everything else. It wasn't shallow. That's, you know, it was the middle of the Gulf, a deep oil. So, and you got to think about, don't think of the cost per barrel right now, but think of the cost to process that barrel. It's costing, you know, around $15 to $20 to produce a barrel of oil right now. Maybe it's a little bit more, right? You know, 10 years ago, it was probably $5 to $10, or maybe 20 years ago, right? 100 years ago, it was less than $1 a barrel, right, to produce. Or 50 years. You know, back when we had oil, we were buying oil at $20 a barrel. It was being produced for maybe $5, $2, who knows, right? The thing is, the cost, you cannot ever go back to that cost to produce that oil. Why? Because the easy to reach oil is gone. And, you know, recently, in the last 20 years, we started actually taking care of what's called sands oil in these massive oil, you know, which is basically sand drenched in oil, which until the price of oil exceeded $60 a barrel, it just wasn't feasible. But now that that it has, now you can go out to this harder to, you know, to extract oil. The thing is, though, it's taken us 80 years, right, to cross this peak. Or, you know, we crossed this peak in the 70s in the United States when we had our oil crisis. At one point, we were producing 80–90% of all the oil in the world, right? 100 years ago, and now I can't remember what it is, but we're producing, you know, under 20%. So the reality is that we're going to consume the remaining oil that much faster than anyone can realize. Why? Because of the exponential growth of consumption of oil. You know, China is so thirsty for oil. India is starving for oil. Okay, all these countries are developing. Africa is going to be, you know, all these countries as they mature and become like America was in the 1960s and 50s and 60s. We were, you know, that's what's happening. If you go to Kuala Lumpur, which is Malaysia, you go look at that city. It looks like, you know, it looks like New York in the 40s and 50s. It's just everything's shooting up. There's so much growth going on in Asia that in the amount of oil that is being consumed to, you know, to achieve this growth is staggering. And the thing is it's going to drain the end of oil, right? It's going to bring that about. And the end of oil, when the price of gas reaches, the price of a barrel of oil reaches $200–300 a barrel, okay, that's pretty much when we know that the end of oil has happened. Because at that point, I mean, it's already gotten to like 120, 150, now it's, you know, whatever, it's down to 80. But it got up there, and it's going to go up there. It's going to sprint up there and come down again. As that happens, then all of a sudden countries are not going to be able to run, right? And ultimately, industry is going to close down. Farming is going to close down. Farmers are going to be basically, I can't run my tractors. They're going to have to go back to more traditional ways, and the collapse will have happened. Food, you know, if people, you know, if we're so reliant on pesticides and basically what we've done is we create these super bugs and everything else. All of a sudden we can't, you know, we don't have the oil, we can't afford the pesticides, right? We've created a whole mess of insects that are, you know, that we can't fight because we can't afford the pesticides. So the sooner we wean ourselves off pesticides, the sooner we get back to sustainable agriculture, and focus on a region, how a region can become self-sufficient. I believe, you know, people are looking at like how do we provide electricity for the country? What we should be asking is like, how can we make each individual house basically independent of the grid, right? So I can run some solar power, I can run some wind power, I can run, you know, can I build cheap power generation? Can I use cheap batteries, you know, car batteries, old car batteries, pick them up, create a massive cell, and can I, just as I am now 20% off the grid when it comes to food, can I get 20% off the grid when it comes to power? Can I charge my car off the grid, right? Can I sell this back to, you know, I would hell sell it back, I'm gonna store it, right? Store it in batteries. So when batteries are all full, add another battery pack, you know, just have a house, you know, like a barn with levels and levels and levels of battery. How many batteries would I need, right? And I wonder, could I get these batteries from wrecked cars or anything else? So that's how I'm thinking. It's like, how can I wean myself off the grid, right? And if I can do it, then ultimately I believe others can. And you know, to me, that I think is the challenge. So this end of growth is going to happen. I mean, the end of growth has happened. The collapse of growth is imminent. It's going to tie in with this, with peak oil, right? And our exponential growth in oil consumption is going to bring it by that much sooner. And if your hopes are that technology is going to help you, the thing is, technology is speeding things up. It's not slowing things down. It's speeding things up. And we know that because the models projected the end of growth, the collapse happening between 2050 and 2080. Now it's projecting that the end of growth has started, and the collapse is within the next 5 to 15 years. That's it. 5 to 15 years. The collapse is here. 5 to 15 years. So what innovation can come about in 5 to 15 years? When you're dealing with things called like the diffusion of technology and markets and other things, diffusion of technology is very slow. Internet and stuff is fast, but you know, bringing in new industries, bringing in new powers. Look at what's going on just with the social capital, right? You know, look at power. I mean, look how long it took for wind and solar and everything else to evolve. It's still evolving. So to think some miracle solution is going to come with technology, yeah, if we all we needed was an app, sure, we can get the market diffusion very quickly, a new platform or whatever. But when it comes to hardware, the diffusion is so much slower, and that is going to basically mean that we can't use technology to slow down or stop the collapse. It's that simple. So, in concluding this talk, is the question then to ask yourself is, what are you doing? Okay, you can either be in denial and go about your job and, you know, your 9-to-5 job and hope that this, you know, this event won't happen, right? That your government will take care of you, right? And then when it does happen, you're basically there with everyone else thinking, why the fuck didn't I listen to Trout, or why the fuck didn't I do something? Why didn't I prepare? right? And because I'm not going to be here to help you. I'm going to be on, I'm here for my family, my community. And, I want my community to be self-sufficient. There's Fuji right there growing. Fujiwara. I'm getting good at seeing some Fuji. And, or you could start thinking like I am, right? Look at the community you live in. I recommend, everyone's like moving to a city. I think that's the wrong move. I would be moving to rural. Getting some land, even though in the States you're kind of screwed because of the farmland life. But if you don't have that much, I don't think this guy putting down pesticide, Roundup. So that's what I would be thinking of. How can I get off the grid? If I can, my personal goal within the next 5 years, get 20% off the, I'm 20% off the food grid. If I can get 20% off the power grid, that'd be awesome. I had a Prius, which I wanted to convert to an electric, but ended up losing that car because my wife said, I was in America and she freaking got rid of it. So that's my challenge to you is, what can you do to ensure your well-being?